Studies Section 1, The Metaphysics of the Pre-Socratics. Introduction. The pre-Socratic era, which essentially speaking constitutes parts of the ancient period, presents a metaphysics that has at its base the search for the ultimate stuff of the world. It attempts to discover the principles that are fundamental to being. Some of the figures notable in this period include Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Heraclitus, Parmenides, Anaxagoras, and a host of others. For some, the question was whether this substance was one of many, while for others, it was whether the condition was fixed or changing. And so, the inquiry into the nature of reality in the pre-Socratics oscillated between singularity and pluralism on the one hand, and permanence and change on the other. In this study section, you will be introduced to the metaphysics of the pre-Socratics, reality as change and conflict. You will also learn about atomists. Learning outcomes for Studies Section 1. When you have studied this section, you should be able to discuss the Milesian philosophers, explain reality as change and conflict, briefly explain the atomists, the Milesian philosophers, what can be referred to as the fundamental problem that the pre-Socratics tried to address is best represented in the various renditions beginning with the Milesian thinkers, that is, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. Thales' concern was to find the unity that underlays all the multiplicity of things in our experience. This is sometimes called the problem of the one and the many. In the world, you encounter many things: fish, sand, stars, rocks, plants, and so on. The question then is, what is it that unifies them all? Why do you consider this a universe and not a multiverse? What basic principle accounts for all this? What fundamental stuff underlies everything we find in the world? This is the primary issue that occupies all the pre-Socratic philosophers. The answer Thales gives, Aristotle tells you, are that water is the source of all things. At first, this answer may seem naive and improbable. However, before you criticize any of these early philosophers, you must remember that you are standing on top of 2,500 years of philosophical speculation and scientific discoveries. Hence, these early attempts to answer these questions are remarkable in their originality and brilliance. Aristotle speculates that Thales reasoned from the fact that water is essential to life and the seed of all things are moist to the conclusion that water is the fundamental element. Another reason may have also occurred to Thales to support his conclusion that everything is transformed water. For example, liquid water can be transformed into gas, steam in bracket, and it also can be changed into solid, ice in brackets. Furthermore, water comes from the air in the form of rain and returns to the air as moist. When water evaporates from a dish, it leaves sediment, apparently turning into earth, while digging down into the earth leads you to water. Finally, living in Miletus and being surrounded by water may have made seem probable to Thales that everything comes from water, although nobody knows what Thales' real argument were. The fact that his immediate successors offered rational support for their theories make it likely the Thales did also. Some further issues are involved in Thales' speculation. If water is the one permanent and basic substance, what caused the change in water's appearance that transforms into all the other things in our experience? This is the question of permanence and change, or being and becoming. Meanwhile, a possible answer in Thales' claim is that all things are full of gods. Contrary to appearances, it is like that he was reverting to a naive theological explanation here. He noticed, for example, that magnetic stones have the power to move iron. He considered this power to be an animate causal agent in seemingly inert stone. Thus, he seemed to believe that the principle of animation and change resides in things themselves. However, the only vocabulary he had for expressing this was to say that things are alive and divinely animated in some fashion. What was the primary issue that occupies all the pre-Socratic philosophers? The issue was what fundamental stuff underlies everything we find in the world. Anaximander took up Thales' task by addressing the question, what is the single basic stuff that is fundamental to all other things? Notice that Anaximander absorbed Thales' assumption that the key to the universe will be a single type of entity. Anaximander was not satisfied with Thales' solution, however. Water is just another particular thing that you find in the world along with earth, air, and fire. How can one kind of thing explain all the other things? It is a contradiction to suppose that something that is clearly not water, for example, fish, really is water. Whatever is fundamental and universal cannot have the particular properties water has. Water itself needs to be explained. Thus, with Anaximander, the process of philosophical criticism begins. According to Anaximander, the ultimate reality must be an eternal imperishable source from which all things are made, to which all things return. This ultimate ground of all things is the apeiron, which means the boundless, the infinite, or the indefinite. It is without any internal boundaries or divisions and is a space-filling dynamic mass. It is infinite in time, otherwise it would have to be something more fundamental that produced it. Furthermore, it is indefinite in quantity. The boundless can be thought of as a reservoir from which all things and their qualities are produced. But what are the properties that describe it? Is it cold? No, Anaximander would say, for then it could not produce the property of heat. Is it wet? No, for then it could not produce the property of dryness. Since it contains or produces all specific properties, it itself cannot be identified with any one of them. Hence, it is undefinable, since we can only define things that have specific properties. Anaximander has a much more developed theory of change that did Thales. He says the world is made up of warring opposites, cold versus heat, night versus day. Since they are opposite, one cannot give birth to the other, but they must all come from something else more fundamental. Therefore, change is the process of various qualities separating out from and returning to the primordial substance. Originally, everything was part of the whirling mass of the boundless, and in the art of creation, the different qualities were flung out much as particles are separating out from the solution in a centrifuge. This whirling motion explains how the planet originally received their motion. Through this process, all the warring opposites, such as hot and cold, wet and dry, were produced. Combinations of these qualities produced the object in our experience. For example, from the combination of cold and wet came the earth and clouds. From the earth and dry came a ring of fire that enclosed the whole. This burst into smaller rings of fire, creating the heavenly bodies. From the warm and the wet came life. Interestingly, Anaximander included a primitive evolutionary theory in his account of the world, claiming that all life forms, including humans, originally came from the sea. He, however, gave a very modern answer to the age-old problem. What does the earth rest on? His answer was that it rests on nothing. Since the earth is the center of a spherical universe, it has no reason to go one way or another. Since any direction is equally attractive, it stays where it is. Anaximander recognizes that from the standpoint of the universe as a whole, there can be no absolute directions of up or down. For him, the universe is an everlasting motion made up of this cycle of creation and destruction, and so it is regarded as the first philosophical account of the cyclical view of history. Although, in his attempting to give a natural explanation of things, he retains the notion of a moral force in the universe. He uses the principle of justice to explain the world cycle. Since everything borrowed its existence from the boundless, it must return the loan. Hence, everything ultimately returns it to the original source. According to Anaximander, what is change? Change is the process of various qualities separating out from and returning to the primordial substance. As with his fellow Milesian, Anaximenes is concerned with the question, what is the basic substance that is the foundation of all reality? He agrees with Anaximander that the basic reality must be eternal, unlimited, and singular. However, continuing the process of philosophical criticism, he finds his colleagues' answer to be inadequate. To say that the basic reality is the boundless is not to say much at all. If there is a basic substance, we must be able to say something about it if you know that it is there at all. Thus, using the criterion of clarity, Anaximenes has the task of finding a less vague and more convincing answer to the question. The answer he gives is simple. The basic reality is here. He may have come to this theory on the basis of several observations. 1. Air is much more pervasive than water, so it is a better candidate for the fundamental substance. 2. Air is central to all nature. It is necessary for the existence of fire and can be found in water and in the earth. 3. You may have noticed that water falls when not supported, but air is self-supporting. Therefore, water cannot support the air as Thales claimed. However, since air can support itself, it can conceivably support the heavenly bodies as well, just as a light breeze can make a leaf float. 4. Finally, air supports life. It is the primary difference between the living and the dead. Anaximenes believed that the soul was identical to air. When you breathe out last breath and then expire, Air, which is the soul, leaves the body. Anaximenes accounted for the process of change by principles that produce changes in the density of the basic substance. One is rarefaction or expansion, and the other is condensation, compression. For example, extremely rarefied air becomes warm and eventually becomes fire. As air becomes increasingly condensed, it becomes colder and successively changes into wind, water, earth, and finally stone. Not content to simply throw out opinions, Anaximenes provides the first recorded scientific experiment to provide evidence for his claim. He observed that when you open your mouth wide and blow on your hand, your breath will feel warm. But when you close your mouth, as if you are going to whistle and blow on your hand, your condensed breath feels cold. Hence, by appealing to the quantitative changes produced by rarefaction and condensation, he believes you can account for the qualitative changes in the world. Did Anaximenes agree with Anaximander? Yes or no? Yes, but he still found his answer inadequate. Reality has changed and conflict. The Milesians sought for the one material substance, the fundamental stuff that was permanent throughout all the changing appearances. For them, permanence was fundamental and change was a secondary phenomenon. However, according to Heraclitus, they had it all backward. He asserted that change is ultimate and most of our experiences of stability and permanence are merely how things appear to be. Heraclitus criticized our tendency to divide the world into separate and distinct things. You talk of coins, fish, olive, rocks, and many particular things, but these are not what are ultimate. To focus in on a very ordinary example, you commonly talk about the weather with your acquaintances. This now gives you the impression that you are referring to some distinct objects. However, you know that the weather is really a collection of many different interacting processes. 1. High and low pressure. 2. Fronts. 3. Humidity. 4. Temperature. 5. Precipitation. 6. Wind direction. And 7. Velocity. Heraclitus suggested that all the objects you talk about are really a collection of processes. He used the metaphor of a river to make his point. Although scholars are divided on what his exact words were, he said something to the effect that you cannot step into the same river twice. In one sense, the river may seem to be the same over time. You can identify it by name, such as the Niger River. However, in another sense, while the name remains the same, the waters are constantly changing and you are not dealing with the same physical entity. One writer in the 1st century AD quoted Heraclitus as saying, "We step and do not step into the same rivers. We are and we are not." Differentiate between permanence and change. While permanence was fundamental, change is a secondary phenomenon. The atomists. The founder of the atomist movement is thought to be a philosopher by the name Leucippus, of which we know very little. Therefore, Democritus, 460 to 360 BC, is the source for most of the atomist ideas. According to the atomist, two principles explain reality, atoms, and the void. Notice that by making the void or empty space a component of being, the atomists disagree with Parmenides, for they are claiming that what is not does exist. Atoms have several features. First, they are indivisible, eternal and unchanging, making them almost small editions of Parmenidean being. However, they are infinity in number. the unlimited expanse of space allows this. Second, there are quantitative differences between them, that is, they come in various sizes and shapes. Third, they are qualitatively alike or neutral, that is, they have no color, taste, temperature, or odor. Change was understood as a result of the differing relationships between the atoms. Democritus' arguments concerning change are as follows. 1. There is no up or down in any absolute sense, and therefore motion is directionless. 2. It follows that atoms do not have weight in any absolute sense. 3. Since there is no natural final resting place for the atoms, the motion of atoms is eternal. Aristotle was not satisfied with this answer and complained. They lazily shipped the question of the origin of motion. The world we see about us can be explained on the basis of the previous principles. 1. The motion of the atoms and their geometrical properties produce. 2. Various interactions and combinations that produce. 3. All the quantities found in sense experience, for example, solid matter result when atoms that have rough surfaces or hooks become interlocked. Liquids are made up of spherical atoms with smooth surfaces that continually roll over one another. Sweet-tasting substances are made up of smooth atoms, while bitter herbs, of course, are made up of atoms with sharp points that irritate our mouth atoms. For Democritus, there is no ordering principle in the world. What patterns there seem to be are simply product of the material properties of atoms and the chance collisions that result from their motions. What is the role of permanence or change in being and becoming? Summary of Study Section 1. In Study Section 1, you have learned that 1. The philosopher that preceded Socrates set philosophy in motion by offering arguments for their theories and by criticizing one another. Although their arguments are not always cogent, they did present reasons for their positions as well as for the refutations of their contemporaries. 2. This was a great advance over previous explanations of the universe, which simply relied on the non-critical transmission of the mythical and poetic traditions of the culture. However, along with their insights came with a number of problems. 3. The wide range of conflicting opinions that developed during this period would lead the next age of philosophers to be very skeptical about whether you could even arrive at any truth that were more than simply personal opinions. This is the end of Study Section 1. Thanks for listening.